what the city is talking about.
The news that impacts you.
Welcome to the Montreal Now podcast.
As you know from real estate, there are some places that are never for sale. Having met with the owners of Canada over the course of the campaign, it's not for sale, won't be for sale ever.
Yeah, he's talking about us. By the way, that's Mark Carney talking about Canada being for sale because, of course, this all ties into Donald Trump's annexation, 51st state, which you went on about again yesterday. Look, at the end of the day here, you sometimes have to wonder, perspective is very different, right? We here consider this, I think fair to say most Canadians, a bit of an insult in talking about a sovereign nation and you wanting to annex it. But, we keep hearing that Americans, or at least depending on what party you belong to, maybe Republicans don't take this the same way as Democrats, which brings us to our next story. Scott Clement is polling director for the Washington Post. He is on the line because there's a new ABC News Ipsos poll, 2,400 Americans surveyed here. And Scott, I'll ask you to basically break it down if you can. First of all, with respect to party lines, if I can put it that way, did you see a big discrepancy? Do we see one?
Yes, thanks for having me. There's two questions we basically asked. Was whether people think Trump is serious about the idea of the U.S. trying to take control of Canada, and whether they would support or oppose doing that. We asked that along with some other questions about some proposals Trump has made, and broadly on the support level, it's very low support for trying to take control of Canada. 13% of Americans said they support that.
That's good.
It is higher among Republicans at 27%, but it's very low among Democrats and Independents, below 10.
We played the clip of what happened yesterday, and I realize this doesn't tie into the survey, which was done a couple of weeks ago. But based on what's happened since that time and up until now, did you happen to watch or see any of yesterday's meeting between Mark Carney and Donald Trump?
Yes, I did.
And do you think at the end of the day, because I'm sure Americans, so it was on all the major networks, of course, last night as well, do you think that changes opinion?
It's really hard to expect that to change. I doubt it would change many people's opinions. This idea has been public. It wasn't a new idea that Trump really put forth. Obviously, putting it forth to Canada's leader is a different story. But the idea's been out there. And in our poll, over half of Americans thought Trump was serious about this, 53%. So it's not that this was something that caught people out of left field. One thing that's interesting, though, is that, people range in how seriously they take it. So if you look at Republicans, people who affiliated with Trump's party, they are less likely to say Trump is serious about this. 35% say that.
Hold on, say that again. People affiliated with Trump's or Republicans say it's less serious or less likely that he's serious about this? Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly right.
Wow.
So overall, 53% of Americans think Trump is serious about trying to take control of Canada, but that drops to 35% among Republicans.
Okay.
And one dynamic that fits into really is that Republicans who support the things that Trump is trying to do, if you go item by item, they tend to think he's serious about that. But they tend to think he's not serious about the things they oppose. And Republicans oppose trying to take control of Canada. And so they similarly don't think he's serious about doing that.
It's interesting to hear you say that because I remember when this first started coming up, and this, goes back now at least a couple of months, this idea of annexing Canada. At the beginning, we would hear Donald Trump talk about this and kind of laugh it off as a joke, because no one took it seriously then. And then, of course, he kept repeating it every opportunity he got. And then we started saying, oh, my God, the man is serious. And then I had the feeling yesterday after seeing Mark Carney talking to Donald Trump, he made it pretty clear that, this is not going to happen. It's not going to happen now. It's not going to happen ever. And I thought Donald Trump actually was quite restrained in his answer back, which is like, I would have expected, well, you know what, you're just the prime minister. Don't tell me what I can do, whatever. I thought he tried to Zelensky him. But instead, he kind of nodded because Mark Carney put it into perspective while saying some things are never for sale, like where we're sitting right now in the White House. He mentioned Buckingham Palace as well. And I really had the sense, I know Donald Trump said never say never, but that's not 2 years, 3 years. Maybe that's, 100 years from now, long after Donald Trump will, be, dead and gone. That was my takeaway from that. What was yours?
Well, I think it's clear that Trump fancies the idea. And he has a number of these ideas that he really likes, and he will repeat them despite plenty of evidence that they're not popular not what most Americans want, not even what most people in his party wants. And you're right, it's hard to know how serious Trump is about an idea until he tries to put things into action. But he did seem to hear Carney yesterday clearly, and it was a very interesting moment to watch.
So I will point out the other country that he's thinking of taking over, of course, is Greenland, and he seems a lot more serious. I saw the interview he did with Kristen Welker over the weekend, where she asked him about using military force, and he kind of said, as far as Canada goes, he kind of laughed it off and said, not going to happen, or he said extremely unlikely. But in the case of Greenland, he seems to be doubling down on Greenland.
Yeah, and from our poll, views of taking control of Greenland are a little bit different. The support for doing so is a little bit higher. It's still very, very low at 22%. But if you look within Trump, the Republican Party, it's 45%. So that's much higher than trying to take control of Canada. And as far as seriousness is concerned, the poll found 68% think Trump is serious about trying to take control of Greenland, compared with 53% for Canada. So people do seem to differentiate between those two different ambitions.
Can I ask you, with respect to the poll, I know we've sort of talked around this as well, what did you take away as the biggest surprise in this?
Well, I mean, I think it's always surprising the degree to which people both believe Trump and take Trump seriously when he says things that are really unusual proposals. I'm surprised because I really just don't know until we ask, and we haven't asked many questions about this. So I think it's informative. It shows people are not doubting him. They don't think he's joking. And then the other part is just the degree of support in America with our partisan divides. Issues can rarely get beyond 60% popular or unpopular because each party really rallies to its side. These proposals are widely unpopular. 86% oppose trying to take over Canada. Other questions we asked about Trump trying to serve a third term, 80% oppose that. 76% oppose trying to take control of Greenland. 80% oppose trying to send U.S. citizens to prisons in other countries. These are unusually unpopular ideas.
Big numbers, as you're saying, statistically you would not expect, so maybe we take that as good news.
Bringing you the breaking news and the people making it. Montreal Now with Aaron Rand, CJAD 800.
So when I saw this headline, I thought we should take a deeper dive into this because something here didn't make sense to me, right? And the story's about what they call gray divorce. So that's people over 50, over the age of 50, who are getting divorced, a number that's been rising, while at the same time, Canada at least, divorce rate here hit a 50-year low in 2020. So there's obviously a pretty large divergence here. We thought we'd try to find out why. Andrew Sofin's a psychotherapist focusing on couples and family and has been dealing, by the way, with this issue for more than 30 years. Mr. Sofin, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Let me go back and ask number one, the obvious question here, with the divorce rate going down in general and going up for people, what we call gray divorces, people over 50, what is the main reason here from what you understand?
Well, I mean, one of the main pieces, we're living longer. So that's obviously, think about 50 years ago, people definitely were not living as longer. And also people have more the means to do so than maybe before. So if you look at a generation ago, a lot of times one spouse was probably very dependent on the other and would say, you know what, it's fine, we're staying married, it's fine. I don't need to really go off and realize my dreams. I'm fine with the sort of the status quo. Whereas now you've got people most of the time, 2 careers, 2 incomes, and a lot of times people are looking more for self-fulfillment than they were maybe a generation ago. So many people, once the kids have aged out and they're sort of looking at each other and going, wait a minute, okay, we're very good at raising kids, but you know what? I don't really want to spend my remaining years with you. I want to go off and do something that really interests me. So I think it's usually it's people looking inside and saying, I want something more in life.
You know, it's interesting. One of the quotes in the story that I read says, and I think you may have said this, is people tend to feel less sure of themselves as they age. And I would have thought exactly the opposite.
Well, it's kind of interesting because a lot of the research shows because we live in such a youth-obsessed culture, many people as they age will sort of compare themselves to the younger people that they see around them. And especially if you have somebody who's been, say, a stay-at-home parent where they don't have the additional piece of a career as part of their identity, they will see themselves as being less than in many ways because it's such a youth-obsessed culture and because you see the celebrities all the time. What is that? The football coach, Bill Belichick?
Yeah, with his 24-year-old girlfriend, yeah.
Right, so can you imagine if you're a woman in your 50s or 60s and you're seeing this? So in other words, if I get divorced, so my husband's going to be dating somebody like that, what about me? So I think that's where the insecurity comes from. It's usually from those who don't have a career or they've retired and that piece is no longer there. So there's insecurity as well around the career. So many people in sort of say big careers usually are going to get pushed out in their 50s, 60s, in favor of a younger generation. So they're losing their identity as well. So that's where I sort of say they're not as confident as they were, say, in their 30s or 40s.
Yeah, and that kind of serves as a trigger, I would think, at some point as well. This idea of, you've been working, suddenly you're retired, so you don't have that to be at all day long. Now you're spending more time with your spouse, with your significant other, and that's something you'd not had to do since maybe you got together at the beginning.
Well, right. It's going almost back to dating.
Right.
And you can imagine if you've raised kids and a whole family, maybe that's been a 30-year arc. Obviously, you're going to be different than you were back when, say, in your 20s or early 30s when you were starting. And you're going to look at the other person, and obviously people grow. And you might not be the same people you were. Well, obviously, you're not the same people as you were. And you might really say, you know what? We had a good run. Dating was, great. Getting married was great. We did really well raising the kids. But, maybe one person wants to spend their sort of, as I say, golden years, off at a cottage on the lake and relaxing, reading books, and the other one wants to travel the world.
Right.
And so it's not a good or bad. It's more recognizing where you're at that stage of life.
Yeah.
And gone are the days where the woman just does what the man says. That's a big difference, too, that I see. It's people having more self-confidence in themselves to say, you know what, I do want something different. And I can do it.
It's interesting to note here, just statistically, right? In 1986, the average age people got married was about 25. In 2020, the average age is now about 31. Yeah. So you were staying together longer. You got married much younger. So maybe it kind of makes sense that at some point, you'd want to call it a day.
Yeah. And because people are living so much longer, too, many people are looking at the quote-unquote golden years as something, as a whole nother chapter. It's not if you think about a generation ago, it's okay, I'm going to be at a senior's home and that's it.
Right.
Whereas many people are saying, no, well, look at the ads. What are some of the ads, that are targeted at, seniors? And you've got, I remember there was one with a woman with gray hair and she's carrying a surfboard. It's even the media and the advertising is focusing on very active senior lifestyle.
Yeah, it's that idea that it's not so much the end of one thing as the beginning of another.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I would ask one other thing, and I found this quite fascinating as well in the story. So, after this great divorce, what tends to happen, I think more, maybe you can just clarify this. So what happens is the men maybe seek out another relationship, but women more often than not do not.
Yeah, and we still live in a very patriarchal culture where generally it's more accepted for a man to be dating somebody much younger, whereas there is still a taboo about a woman dating somebody much younger. So most of the time you will see the men start turning around, and also what do they see in the media around them? Al Pacino, Bill Belichick, all of these different people with, Mick Jagger, all of that stuff. So the messaging is very much for the men. Oh, well, I can have another relationship with somebody 20 years my junior. And I find a lot of the women, especially if they've been stay-at-home parents, they're like, I'm done with taking care of people. I do not want another guy that I have to take care of. And especially if I'm looking at somebody the same age as me, I don't want to go into another phase where I'm just taking care of another person. And so they tend to sort of go more for friendship circles of, hanging out with their best friends, going on trips with their friends, and sort of saying, you know what, I'm fine like this. I mean, obviously, this is a generalization. It's not true for every single person, but this is more anecdotal than you see in more of the research, that the men definitely tend to lean towards getting in another relationship.
I have to wrap up. I would just ask one last question. Sure. Do you see this trend continuing? Is there some reason to think it won't?
I think it's going to continue. It definitely, I think it will continue, especially as people live longer and the stigma of being active in old age is gone. It's gone.
All right. We leave it at that. I find this fascinating. Mr. Sofin, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Take care. Thank you so much, Aaron.
Andrew Sofin, psychotherapist. It's called Grey Divorce. On an increase in Canada despite the general divorce rate going down, more people over 50 are getting divorced than ever before.
The very latest news, reported and discussed. Welcome back to Montreal Now on CJAD 800.
You're joined now by former Quebec Premier, now partner at Therrien, Couture and Jolicoeur. Jean Charest is our guest. Mr. Charest, thanks for your time this afternoon. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Aaron. I hope you're doing well.
I'm doing well. I hope you are as well. And I know you've probably been following along, perhaps more closely than any of us, the developments in the last couple of days between Mark Carney and Donald Trump. So I would ask you just off the top for your reaction to yesterday's meeting and what you thought.
It was a good meeting. Mark Carney's off to a good start with President Trump, and we are starting to get a good sense of how Mr. Trump operates and what his modus operandi is. And a lot of it has to do, Aaron, with tone. And, it's the old line in leadership that tone comes from the top, but this is especially true in the case of Donald Trump. And the tone was respectful. It was rather friendly. And I like Mr. Carney's line about ownership and saying certain things are not for sale, like the White House, and then saying I've just consulted the 40 million owners of Canada, were very good lines. It was very well done in terms of expressing what our sentiment is.
It's funny you say that. I think as well, the thing that stuck out to me was when he called him a transformational president. That's such a great word because it can mean so many different things. I thought that was actually quite brilliant.
You got it. I mean, that's exact. So he went to the meeting obviously very well prepared, and it showed. And because a part of the meeting with Mr. Trump, every leader will tell you is a seduction episode. You have to seduce him, so to speak. But how do you do it without looking as though you're groveling and saying things that are just simple flattery? But in this case, you're absolutely right. He chose a word that's sufficiently generic to allow Mr. Trump to think the best of himself.
So that some critics will say, all well and good, yeah, he was great, but we came out of there with nothing because there was no announcement of any kind. What do we say to that, and how long do you think until that actually begins to happen?
We did come out of there with something, and what we came out of there with is a mutual engagement to sit down and start a negotiation, and pointing in the direction of what we call the USMCA, what is the trade agreement that we have, that Donald Trump signed in 2018. And that's a very positive step because it's a framework for discussion that's predictable, that we know, and allows us to have an orderly and organized discussion, which has not been the case up until now. So that is what we have gained, and frankly, at this point, that's all we need. And we're in a bizarre and unusual position because we need to go fast, and yet we need to go slow. Fast in the sense of starting something and some discussions, establishing a relationship, and slow in the sense, Aaron, that we shouldn't be too quick in trying to reach an agreement, let other countries go, and not put ourselves in a position where we deprive ourselves of certain gains that other countries will obtain later on. So it's tricky, but in our case, it's where we're in the right place at this point.
So we know today that Mark Carney had a chance to speak to all the Canadian premiers. This is happening because we have some provinces now, and most notably, I guess, in Alberta, although Saskatchewan seems to be dealing with this as well. What do you make of this apparent divide growing wider and wider when you hear someone like Danielle Smith talking about putting separation on the referendum if enough people want it?
Well, Prime Minister Carney is right to reach out. And a big part of his mandate in his job description as a new Prime Minister is going to be to reach out to the whole country, leaders of the opposition, business community, the nonprofit, everyone. And first in line are the provinces with whom he has to work. The sentiment in the West is, justifiably resentful to a certain point to the rest of the country because they feel that when their issues were on the table, transporting energy pipelines, for example, that the rest of the country did not show up and were not supportive, and yet they generate a lot of wealth. So I think we have to understand that and acknowledge it. Now, it'll be their decision on how they want to debate it, and I don't want to stick my nose into the issues of the referendum in Alberta, but we've been there, Aaron, as you know. We have been there. We know what the consequences are, and I certainly would not encourage them to go down that rabbit hole because they're going to spend a lot of time and energy on something that's not going to lead to anything very constructive, as opposed to having their issues acknowledged by the Prime Minister and addressed, which I'm hoping Mark Carney will be successful in doing.
Last thing I will ask you references Pierre Poilievre. He lost his own riding. Conservatives, of course, despite the support in popular votes, still are runner-up, if you will. And now we're at a point where, and I think some people have probably been questioning his future within the party. What's your take on this? We know he's going to run in that by-election in Alberta, but what do you think?
I hope he returns to the House of Commons as rapidly as possible. My wish, I would hope that Mark Carney would, launch that by-election very rapidly and allow him to return to the House and not oppose him in that riding. And it's very important that we have a choice in the country, Aaron. I'm not in active politics anymore, but whether it's at the Quebec level or the federal level, we are, I think, we deserve as citizens of Canada of having a political choice when we go to the polls. And if only for that, I do hope the Conservative Party rebuilds as rapidly as possible.
And if Pierre Poilievre was to lose, his support within that party, you ran against him, would you consider running again?
Well, the answer to that is no. I prefer staying married.
All right. Don't think we need to say anything beyond that.
No, I think that's pretty much it.
Have you ever wondered what would have happened had you won that? How different things would have been on the political landscape in this country had you been leading the Conservatives?
Actually, not a lot, and this may surprise people. No, but serious. I've been around for a while, and if you'd sit there wondering what if, boy, life is too short. I'm very happy in what I'm doing now. I'm with a great law firm with Therrien, Couture and Jolicoeur here. I'm happy to. But we've all learned this, and you learn that with time and with age. There's not enough time to think about the what ifs. I have too much to do to spend time on that.
I always appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aaron.
Take good care. You too. Jean Charest, former Quebec Premier, and now, of course, as he said, he's a partner at Therrien, Couture and Jolicoeur.
Because you don't want to miss a thing. Montreal Now on CJAD 800.
Bry Jensen, we've spoken before. She is host of Pontifacts, which is a papal history podcast. Bry, thank you for coming on. I know we spoke a couple of weeks ago when all this began, of course, with the passing of Pope Francis. Tell us, first of all, today, with respect to historical precedents, what we saw.
Wow. Well, today we actually got to see the first American elected pope. And also, even though he is American, given that he has spent most of his time in Peru, we are seeing the second of Latin America-influenced popes in all history. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty groundbreaking today.
Yeah, I would also point out, again, it's interesting to put it in this perspective. I saw someone suggesting he was a long shot as far as becoming the next pope. Why would that be, do you think?
Well, generally speaking, he would be a long shot because he's American, for one. And two, he's only been a cardinal for 2 years. So the fact that he has already risen dramatically through the ranks of the cardinalate, enough to be recognized as Pope and become one of the senior clergy members, is absolutely incredible. It's a meteoric rise.
Do we know as well what Pope Francis had basically put his trust in him in some kind of position previously? He had dealings with the Pope previously?
Yes, absolutely. So he had been appointed to the Congregation of the Clergy in 2019, and then he was made the prefect for the Dicastery of Bishops in 2023. That's when he was initially made a cardinal as well. So this was somebody that Francis saw rising through the ranks and saw having incredible influence, and particularly, again, from communities that are not generally represented. And so Francis very much saw him and invested a lot of faith in him, and then, of course, as we know, this year made him a cardinal bishop, bumping him way up the list.
Yeah, I would point out, by the way, I said just off the top, fairly quickly, right? We know that, historically, sometimes it's taken, I think they said back in the, 12 or 1300s, you would know, it took 2 years to select, not that you're that old, it took 2 years to select a new pope. This took 2 days.
Oh, almost 3 years to elect a pope in that election. But yes, this was a very quick election. We only had 4 ballots to come up with a pope, which is as fast as they elected Pope Benedict XVI, who was considered a shoo-in at the time.
Are we going to find out within the next couple of days how this all happened, who came around, how the votes were cast? Is that part of all this at the end when it's done?
No, not officially.
Nothing,
officially,
huh?
It's a full record of secret. The records are completely confidential. However, word does often start to leak out. The Pope himself could comment on it, and we would get some, because he's the only one who's allowed to do so, so we might get some insight, but not likely.
Okay. If I can ask you, as someone who's studying this for so long, it has been, were you surprised by this pick?
I was not terribly surprised because he had come up on a couple lists of the Papabili candidates, but he was considered quite a long shot. So I had thought there were a couple candidates that were more likely, but yeah, he was a name I had heard.
Okay, and what do we expect from him? I know his first words were "Peace be upon you" to the people gathered, of course, in front. What are we expecting to hear from him in terms of how he will carry out his term?
Well, obliquely, even though we can't ascertain political points to them, he is somewhat known as a centrist. So we will see a papacy that is somewhat in line with Pope Francis, and we also know by choosing the name Leo, he is hearkening back to Leo XIII, who was, of course, a massive social justice fighter in the church. So we will see a lot of that similar vein play out, but he is also potentially a little bit more formal, a little bit more centrist than Francis. So we'll see similar, but maybe a little slower.
So that would be my next question, knowing nothing about this. By making him Leo, and you just mentioned following Leo the 13th, is there sort of a method to that madness, if you will? Why Leo?
Well, Leo was absolutely a dominant force in the church. He's probably one of the best known popes of the modern period. He was pope for an incredibly long time. He was, like I said, a massive force for social justice and for, again, all the things that Francis stood by. Before Francis, when we talked about progressivism in the church, we would have been talking about Leo XIII. So we're talking about somebody who wants to take a very active role.
Okay. This is fascinating. Listen, I know this is an exciting day for you, as it is for many people, many Catholics around the world. I thank you so much for the time, Bry. Hope we can check in with you a little later as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Of course, my pleasure. Bry Jensen, if you want to read up on your papal history, the podcast, or if you see one, it's Pontifacts, Ponti Facts, Facts.
This has been the Montreal Now podcast.
Listen live on your radio weekday afternoons from 2 to 6
on CJAD 800
or through the iHeartRadio app.